You will enter the Forbidden City's inner sanctum, where power wasn't won on battlefields, but in bedchambers and dinner parties. This is not a biography. It's a forensic investigation into one of history's most brilliant and terrifying political operators. We will uncover how CIXI built a 47-year dictatorship from nothing but her own wits, why she feared the camera's eye, and examine the chemical evidence that proves her final, most intimate murder. This is a portrait of absolute power, but it's a lie. The silks, the pearls, the carefully constructed divinity, all of it was a shield. Behind it was a woman so terrified of the modern world, she tried to stop time itself, and so committed to control that her very last act on earth was to order the murder of the sitting emperor, who was also her nephew and her prisoner. This is the story of how a concubine became a dictator, and how her fear of the future doomed an empire. To understand the sheer impossibility of CIXI's rise, you must first feel the weight of the system designed to crush her. Step into the Forbidden City in the 1850s. It is not merely a palace, it is a machine for producing emperors, an exquisitely tuned instrument of hierarchy where every glance, every step, every color of robe is prescribed by ancient precedent. The air is thick with sandalwood and silent, desperate calculation. At its heart resides the Xianfeng Emperor, a man crumbling under the dual burdens of inheritance and invasion as the Opium Wars and the Taiping Rebellion tear his empire apart. His world is one of ritualized solitude, broken only by the presence of his women, who themselves are ranked in a rigid taxonomy. Empresses, consorts, concubines, and noble ladies, each a prisoner of their title. Into this gilded cage walks a young girl from the Yehanara clan. She is not a great beauty by conventional accounts, but she possesses something far more dangerous: a piercing intelligence, a clear melodic voice, and a preternatural understanding of power's geography. Entering as a low-ranking concubine, she is given the title Noble Lady Lan. Her sphere is measured in feet, the dimensions of her apartment, the distance she must keep. Her future is a closed loop: to serve, to hope for a fleeting imperial glance, to maybe bear a child, and to fade into obscurity within the suffocating grandeur of the harem. The rules are scripture. A woman's influence is meant to end at the bedroom door. But Yehanara, the future CIXI, reads the unspoken text. She sees that while the system is formidable, it is operated by humans with vanity, fear, and desire. Her first and most critical weapon is not intrigue, but motherhood. In 1856, she gives birth to Xianfeng's first and only surviving son, Zaichun. Overnight, her status rockets from noble lady to consort Yi. The child is not just a son. He is the dynasty's fragile future, a human treasure that suddenly makes her, the mother, indispensable. This is her first crucial leverage. She uses the access granted by motherhood to study the emperor himself, to understand his anxieties, his frustrations with his own inept court. She begins to whisper, to offer not just comfort, but perspective. Some accounts suggest she even learned to read official memorials, a shocking breach of protocol. She wasn't just sharing a bed, she was apprenticing in statecraft. Then in 1861, the axis of her world shifts violently. The Xianfeng Emperor, broken by defeat, dies in the remote Jahal hunting lodge. The throne passes to her 5-year-old son, now the Tongji Emperor. Power should have transferred to a council of 8 regents, handpicked by Xianfeng to sideline her. In that moment, Yehanara was meant to become a relic. The Empress Dowager, a figure of reverence to be kept in silken confinement, heard only in prayers for the emperor's health. This is when the clerk's daughter from the Yehanara clan performs her first masterstroke of political theater. She recognizes a shared enemy in the overbearing regents and a potential ally in her late husband's brother, the capable and progressive Prince Gong, who had been sidelined. More critically, she forges a sacred pact with Xianfeng's senior widow, the gentle Empress Qian. Together, the two widows present a united front, a vision of maternal piety safeguarding the boy emperor. Behind this impeccable facade, they plot a coup. The Xinyu coup is executed not with armies in the streets, but with seals, decrees, and breathtaking audacity. Returning to Beijing ahead of the regent's cortege, CIXI and her allies issue edicts in the child emperor's name, accusing the regents of grave crimes. The surprise is total. The regents are arrested. 2 are forced to commit suicide. The system, designed to eject her, is now hers to command. She and Qian are elevated as co-regents, listing from behind screens, with Prince Gong as the prince advisor. The screen is the perfect metaphor. It maintains the illusion of male authority, while she, shrouded in yellow silk, holds the strings. She had exploited the system's every sacred rule, the sanctity of the mother, the authority of the emperor's seal, the unity of the imperial household, to hollow it out from within. She didn't shatter the forbidden city's gates. She picked the lock, stepped inside, and quietly became its warden. The long illusion of her reign had begun. With the regents overthrown, CIXI now faced the true test, not seizing power, but keeping it indefinitely from behind a screen. Her son, the boy Emperor Tongji, was her shield and her shackle. Every decree issued in his name reinforced her legitimacy, yet his eventual maturity threatened her authority with obsolescence. Her genius in these early years was architectural. She didn't just rule, she constructed an intricate political ecosystem where she became the sole, indispensable source of grace and favor. This was the era of the Tongji Restoration, a period of tentative modernization led by the capable Prince Gong. But while he focused on shipyards and foreign legations, CIXI focused on the human terrain of the court. She understood that in an empire governed by personal allegiance, controlling personnel was the ultimate power. She became a master of the subtle gesture, a prized piece of jade bestowed, a coveted audience granted, a well-timed word of disapproval whispered. She cultivated a network of informants, from senior eunuchs to mid-level bureaucrats, transforming the palace into a vast listening device. Loyalty was rewarded with promotion. Ambition, if not channeled through her, was quietly suffocated. Prince Gong himself, the brilliant partner of her coup, would be the first to feel the chill of her calculated restraint. After initial reliance, she repeatedly demoted and reinstated him. A brutal lesson to all that no one, no matter how vital, was beyond her reach or beneath her correction. Her system, however, faced its most profound stress test in 1875 when the Tongji Emperor, barely 18, died suddenly of smallpox, or, as whispers insisted, of syphilitic decay, fueled by a deliberate descent into debauchery to escape her domination. His death presented a dynastic crisis, he left no heir. According to imperial tradition, the succession should have passed to a descendant of the next generation, a move that would have elevated CIXI to a more distant, less powerful role as Grand Empress Dowager. She acted with breathtaking logistical coldness. Within hours before the court could coalesce around an alternative, she presented her solution. Her 3-year-old nephew, Zetian, would be the new emperor. The choice was a violation of ritual, bypassing more qualified candidates. But her reasoning was crystalline. A child emperor meant another long regency. The boy's mother was her own sister, guaranteeing familial loyalty. In that stunned, grief-filled night, she secured another half-century of influence. She renamed the reign Guangxu, meaning glorious succession, a title dripping with ironic hope. Now, as the sole surviving regent following the mysterious death of her co-regent Qian in 1881, a death so conveniently timed it has never shed the scent of suspicion, CIXI's architecture was complete. The court was no longer a governing body, but a theater of her will. The young Guangxu was raised in isolation, a puppet whose strings she knotted ever tighter. Tutors reported on his every word. Eunuchs monitored his every meal. She insisted on a crippling, cloying formality between them, forcing the child to address her with the most honorific titles, conditioning him to see her not as a mother, but as a sovereign before whom he must kneel. Her daily life became a performance of sacred bureaucracy. She would hold dawn audiences from behind the screen, her voice clear and firm, dictating decisions on everything from provincial appointments to border disputes. She mastered the art of speaking in the passive voice of imperial tradition, making her personal whims sound like the immutable verdicts of heaven. She collected not just power, but people, placing them in a delicate, hierarchical web of dependency. To be outside her web was to be politically extinct. She had transformed the Forbidden City from a machine for producing emperors into a factory for manufacturing her own enduring supremacy, proving that the most absolute control often resides not in the one who sits on the throne, but in the hand that carefully adjusts the strings from the shadows. The real CIXI, the woman behind the screen, was not a grand strategist. In the traditional sense, her genius was interpersonal, her intuition for control immediate and devastating. But as the years of her regency stretched into decades, a profound transformation took hold. The political operator began to recede, and in her place emerged something more unsettling: the imperial aesthete. Governance slowly ceased to be about the navigation of external threats and increasingly became an exercise in the meticulous curation of her own reality. The Forbidden City, and later the Summer Palace she rebuilt, transformed from seats of power into vast, physical manifestations of her psyche, a world where beauty, symbolism, and personal whim began to outweigh crude necessities like military budgets or industrial policy. This was not mere decadence. It was a philosophy of rule. Having mastered the human politics of the court, she turned her will to the environment itself. Consider her relationship with the modern. It wasn't simply ignorance. It was a visceral, superstitious rejection of anything that disrupted her constructed harmony. Railways were not just machines. Their screeching metal and belching smoke violated the sacred geomantic balance of the land, disturbing the ancestors. The telegraph's wires were vulgar scars across the sky. Electricity was an unnatural, ghostly fire. These weren't policy positions. They were almost allergic reactions. Her world was to be one of curated silence, of slow movement by palanquin, of lantern light that flattered and softened. Technology that promised efficiency was irrelevant. What mattered was atmosphere, the preservation of a perfect imperial dream. Nowhere is this clearer than in the story of the Marble Barge. Following the utter destruction of the original Summer Palace by Anglo-French forces in 1860, CIXI became obsessed with its reconstruction, particularly with the Yiheyuan complex. Funds were perpetually scarce, especially for a navy desperately trying to modernize after humiliating defeats. Yet, between 1886 and 1895, a staggering amount of silver intended for shipbuilding was diverted to her gardens and pavilions. The centerpiece was a whimsical two-story stone pavilion in the shape of a pleasure boat, moored forever at the lake's edge. To a practical mind, it is a monument to catastrophic folly. A fleet of modern warships traded for a static, ornamental folly. But to CIXI's eye, the Marble Barge was a superior form of power. A real warship would rust in a distant port, commanded by admirals with their own ambitions. This stone vessel, however, was eternal. It sat in her garden, a symbol of stability and leisure under her direct gaze. It spoke not of defense, but of such absolute security that the ruler could afford whimsy. It was power made decorative, and in her mind, the decoration was the power. This collision of superstition and image crafting culminated in her fraught relationship with the camera. Initially, she shared the widespread belief that photography could steal a subject's soul, a terrifying concept for a woman whose authority was intertwined with her perceived inviolability. But her curiosity and her dawning understanding of the medium's propaganda potential won out. The photographic sessions she eventually permitted were not candid portraits. They were elaborate state rituals. She controlled every element: the heavy embroidered robes, the specific Buddhist symbols held in her hands, the backdrop of painted screens mimicking auspicious settings. She posed as Guanyin, the goddess of mercy, transforming herself from a political actor into a benevolent deity. The resulting images are masterpieces of calculated fiction. They show no trace of the iron-willed manipulator or the paranoid ruler. They present an icon, serene and celestial, floating above the messy realities of famine, rebellion, and imperial decline. The camera, which she feared for its truth-telling power, became her ultimate tool for illusion. In her crafted world, the symbol became more real than the substance, the marble boat more valuable than the battleship, and her own carefully staged image more vital than the crumbling empire it was meant to represent. The state was becoming a portrait, beautiful, static, and tragically fragile. For years, the Guangxu emperor existed as a phantom in his own palace. His world was a sequence of stifling rituals, the pre-dawn audiences where his aunt's voice issued final judgments from behind the yellow silk, the meticulous study of Confucian classics that spoke of righteous rule, the evenings spent in the claustrophobic perfection of his chambers. He was a scholar prince, gentle, introspective, and painfully aware of the dynasty's decay. His tutors, like the enlightened Wengtonge, fed him not just ancient philosophy, but desperate, thrilling reports from the world outside, of Japan's explosive modernization following the Meiji Restoration, of steam-powered industries in Europe, of constitutional monarchies, where sovereigns led rather than followed the currents of change. a quiet fire began to kindle within him. It was the fire of a man who realized he bore the title of Son of Heaven, yet had never been allowed to feel the sun. The spark became ablaze in the wake of the humiliating Sino-Japanese War of 1894-1895. China's modernized fleet, the fruit of earlier restoration efforts, was annihilated. The peace terms were a carving knife. Taiwan ceded a colossal indemnity, and foreign powers scrambling for concessions. For Guangxu, the defeat was a catalytic shock. It wasn't just a loss. It was proof that the old ways, the very system his aunt curated with such devotion, were a pathway to oblivion. In the summer of 1898, the young emperor, now 26 and burning with a sense of terrifying purpose, stepped from the shadows. He began issuing decrees in a staggering, unprecedented torrent. The 100 Days' Reform had begun. The edicts flew from his writing brush like manifestos for a new world. He commanded the creation of a modern education system to replace the archaic civil service exams. He ordered the establishment of banks, railways, and factories. He demanded the streamlining of the bloated, corrupt bureaucracy and the creation of a professional army. He even envisioned a constitutional monarchy, a suggestion that vibrated with revolutionary potential. For 103 dizzying days, the Forbidden City, long a museum of stillness, thrummed with the electric energy of possibility. Reformist scholars like Kang Yue and Liang Qichao found themselves in private audiences, their words shaping imperial policy. Guangxu worked through the night, his chambers lit late, the very air seeming to crackle. He was, for the first and only time, truly emperor. In the quiet courtyards of the summer palace, however, each decree landed like a declaration of war. To CIXI, this was not progress. It was anarchy. It was a personal and political insult of unimaginable scale. The young man she had raised as a puppet was severing his strings with a blunt knife. His advisors were little boys and dangerous radicals in her eyes. His reforms attacked the very foundation of her power, the vast network of conservative Manchu nobles and Han bureaucrats whose positions depended on the old examination system and whose loyalty she owned. They flocked to her, their voices a chorus of alarm. The military modernization threatened the elite banner armies. Even her trusted eunuchs, led by the notorious Li Lianying, fed her tales of disrespect and conspiracy. The emperor's energy was not admired. It was diagnosed as a dangerous fever. Her retaliation was not immediate, which made it all the more chilling. She allowed the frenzy in the capital to build, letting Guangxu overreach, letting the conservative opposition coalesce firmly around her. She was the still, silent center of the gathering storm. The final catalyst was a rumor, likely fabricated by her allies, that the reformers planned to besiege the summer palace and remove her entirely. This was the pretext she needed. On September 21, 1898, she acted with the lethal efficiency of her long-forgotten coup. Returning suddenly to the Forbidden City, she confronted Guangxu. The details are shrouded, but the outcome is stark. He was forced to sign a decree inviting her to resume regent's power. The reform edicts were nullified. The emperor's closest advisors were rounded up. 6 were executed without trial at Kaishiku execution grounds, their blood sealing the end of the dream. Guangxu was not deposed. That would have been too clean, too final. Instead, he was entombed alive. Confined to the tiny Yingtai Pavilion, a palace on an isolated island in the middle of the palace lake, he became the prisoner of the ocean terrace. Windows were bricked up. His few remaining loyal servants were replaced by CIXI's spies. His beloved consort, Jen, was exiled. He was permitted to attend ceremonies, a hollow shell in dragon robes, but could speak to no one of substance. His existence was now a prolonged, exquisite punishment, a living monument to the cost of defying the architect of the system. The fire was extinguished, leaving only cold ash and the profound silence of a gilded cage. The ruler had reclaimed her puppet, but the strings were now chains. The failure of the 100 Days Reform solved nothing. It merely bottled the pressure of a collapsing empire. CIXI, having reasserted her dominance over the Forbidden City, now faced a world boiling with hatred beyond its walls. Foreign powers, sensing the dynasty's profound weakness, carved out spheres of influence, with the casual brutality of men dividing a meal. Christian missionaries, protected by unequal treaties, built churches where ancestral temples once stood. Telegraph lines and railway tracks, those hated symbols of modernity, snaked across the countryside, disrupting graves and livelihoods. The air itself seemed thick with humiliation, and from this fertile ground of resentment sprang a virulent force, the Boxers united in righteousness. Initially, the Boxers were a threat to the dynasty, a peasant militia attacking both foreign symbols and Chinese converts. But CIXI, secluded in the summer palace and fed a constant stream of alarming reports by conservative Manchu princes, like Prince Duan, began to see in their frenzy not a danger, but a potential weapon. Here were thousands of fanatical young men who believed they were invulnerable to foreign bullets, who burned with a purifying hatred for the outsiders she too despised. Their superstition mirrored her own. Their desire to cleanse the land aligned with her longing to reset the clock. In the spring of 1900, after agonizing hesitation, she made the most fateful decision of her reign. She chose to legitimize the Boxers, to bring the storm inside the gates. The shift was seismic. Boxer bands, now unofficially sanctioned, flooded into Beijing and Tianjin. They posted placards on city walls, thrilling and terrifying the populace. Support the Qing, destroy the foreigners. The air filled with the smell of incense and burning timbers as churches and foreign residences were torched. CIXI, convinced by hardliners that the foreign legations were plotting to restore Guangxu to real power, an ultimate nightmare scenario, believed she could harness this raw, chaotic force to expel the foreign presence and solidify her own position once and for all. It was a gamble of breathtaking audacity to use mystical nationalism as a tool of statecraft. On June 21, 1900, she committed fully, issuing an imperial decree that was, in effect, a declaration of war against all the major world powers. The order was to exterminate the foreigners. The legation quarter in Beijing, a cluster of Western-style buildings near the imperial city, became a frantic fortress under siege. For 55 days, the world watched in horror as artillery shells rained down, not from some rogue militia, but from imperial troops under the command of government generals. CIXI's court descended into a surreal madness. Boxer performers were brought into the palace to demonstrate their supposed magical powers. Diplomacy was abandoned for ritual incantation. The prisoner of the Ocean Terrace, Emperor Guangxu, reportedly alone in his judgment, dared to voice dissent, arguing the futility of the war. He was ignored, a ghost at the feast of bellicose folly. The illusion of boxer invincibility shattered against the disciplined gunfire of the 8-nation alliance relief force. As the foreign troops fought their way from the coast to the capital, the reality of CIXI's miscalculation crystallized into sheer, undiluted terror. The sound of distant artillery, growing louder each day, was no longer the sound of victory, but of approaching doom. On August 14th, the Alliance breached the city walls. The chaos in the Forbidden City was absolute, a panic of shattering porcelain, shredded silks, and fleeing eunuchs. CIXI's transformation in that moment was complete. The architect of empire became a fugitive. She orchestrated a final grim audience, forcing the captive Guangxu to appear with her. Then, she shed the trappings of divinity. She chopped off the elaborate nails she had worn for decades, symbols of a life without labor. She exchanged her imperial robes for the coarse blue trousers of a peasant woman. In a simple wooden cart, with the bewildered emperor in tow, she fled Beijing through a back gate at dawn. The Xi'an flight was a journey of utter degradation. For months they lived on coarse millet, slept in dirt-floored huts, their imperial progress reduced to a desperate scramble for survival. The woman who had feared the whistle of a train now knew the bite of hunger and the sting of rain on a country road. The summer palace, her marble barge, the sacred halls of the Forbidden City, all were left to the looters and the conquering armies. The world she had so meticulously curated was left in ruins, a testament to the catastrophic price of ruling by sentiment and symbol over strategy and sense. The ultimate power had been revealed as the ultimate vulnerability. The woman who returned to Beijing in January of 1902 was a ghost, haunting her own palace. The 16-month exile in Xi'an had been a masterclass in humiliation, a slow, grinding lesson in the price of miscalculation. The empire was shattered, its treasury emptied by a colossal indemnity imposed by the victorious powers, 450 million taels of silver, a debt that would strangle generations. Foreign troops patrolled the capital. The Forbidden City's treasures had been looted, its aura of inviolability stripped bare. Yet CIXI disembarked from her train, a mode of transport she now tolerated as a necessity of survival, with the bearing of a conqueror. Her survival was her victory. She had weathered the cataclysm her policies had invited, and now she commenced the most audacious performance of her life, the rehabilitation of a despot as a progressive stateswoman. This final act was a breathtaking exercise in political theater. She initiated what historians call the New Policies, or the Late Qing Reform, a sweeping program that on paper mirrored everything the imprisoned Guangxu had advocated during his 100 days. She abolished the ancient civil service exams, championed the study of Western science, promised constitutional preparation, and even spoke of granting women education. It was a pantomime of progress, but its motivation was pure, corrosive survival. She was now keenly, painfully aware of the foreign gaze. Her audience was no longer just the conservative Manchu courtiers, but the legations watching from the eastern quarter of the city. Every move was calculated to appease, to reassure, to rewrite history. She hosted extravagant garden parties for the wives of diplomats, presenting herself as a charming, gracious grandmother, offering them trinkets and smiles. She embraced the camera with renewed fervor, posing with foreign envoys, crafting an image of a ruler reconciled to the modern world. But beneath this glossy veneer, the old architecture of control remained. its foundations now twisted with a new kind of paranoid bitterness. The reforms were a facade, deliberately slow and hedged with conditions, designed to give the appearance of momentum without ever relinquishing the core of her power. The proposed constitution was a distant 9-year promise, a phantom meant to placate rising internal dissent. The real business of the court returned to the familiar rhythms of patronage and personal loyalty. And at the heart of this decaying system, the living reminder of her failure festered. Emperor Guangxu remained in his island prison, his presence a constant, silent rebuke. He was trotted out for ceremonial functions, a pale and listless figure beside her, his eyes hollow. The court understood this brutal geography. The Empress Dowager resided in the palace of joyful longevity, while the Son of Heaven moldered in the pavilion of nourishing harmony. A cruel joke of a name. Her relationship with him was beyond repair, a frozen tundra of mutual dread and resentment. He was the embodiment of the future she had tried and failed to control. And she could neither restore him nor eliminate him, not while the world was watching. Her personal world contracted into a bizarre fusion of superstition and performative modernity. She developed an almost addictive fascination with Western gadgets and luxuries, a stark contrast to her earlier phobias. A car was imported, though she found its speed unsettling, and demoted the driver to a mechanic after he dared sit in her presence. A gramophone crackled with opera tunes in her chambers. She cherished an electric lamp, marveling at its steady light. Yet these were trophies, curios in her collection, not tools for governance. She spent her days immersed in palace dramas, theater performances, and the intricate rituals of her own comfort, while her ministers struggled with the impossible task of administering a bankrupt state. The energy that had once been spent on mastering factions was now consumed by the meticulous management of her own legacy and the containment of the ghost emperor down by the lake. She was building a beautiful, intricate shell around a hollow core, polishing the exterior while the interior quietly rotted. The return was not a renaissance. It was an elaborate holding pattern, a desperate attempt to stall the setting of the sun. And in the gathering twilight of her years, the only certainty was that she could not permit the dawn of a new day to break under any authority but her own, even if that meant the night would be eternal. So, what remains when the final curtain falls? Not the echo of great battles or the legacy of enlightened reform, but the profound silence of a vacuum. CIXI's story is not one of creation, but of masterful, sustained curation. She did not build an empire. She collected one, treating its institutions, its treasury, and even its emperors as artifacts to be arranged, polished, and, when necessary, deaccessioned. Her reign was the longest closing act in Chinese history, a deliberate and lavish slowing of time itself. The marble boat sits, forever immobile, not as a monument to folly, but as the perfect emblem of her power, imposing, beautiful, and utterly incapable of navigation. She steered nothing. She merely ensured the riverbank was exquisitely landscaped. The 21st century forensic analysis that confirmed Guangxu's death by acute arsenic poisoning is more than a solution to a cold case. It is the final unassailable testament to her ruling philosophy. In those last hours of November 1908, as her own body failed, her final calculation was one of aesthetic and political symmetry. the puppet could not outlive the puppeteer. His continued existence, even for a day beyond hers, represented a chaotic variable, a potential breach in the narrative she had spent 5 decades controlling. The poison was the ultimate tool of curation, a violent brushstroke ensuring the composition of her reign remained undisturbed. It was the last and most intimate act of collecting. She had collected a throne, a court, a navy's budget, a nation's future. With a dose of arsenic, she collected an emperor's death, folding it neatly into her own. And so we are left not with a villain, but with a profound and tragic equation. Her genius for personal survival was precisely the toxin that ensured systemic failure. Every manipulation that extended her rule, pitting factions against one another, stifling innovation, prioritizing loyalty over competence, sacrificing the state on the altar of personal prerogative, deepened the dynasty's paralysis. She proved a woman could rule the Qing Empire with unmatched dexterity, and in doing so, demonstrated why it was doomed. The world outside hurtled forward on steam and steel, fueled by ideas she could not abide, and energies she could not channel. She held the pieces of a Ming vase together with a grip of iron, misunderstanding that the very pressure of her hold was preventing the repairs needed to make it functional again. The sadness that lingers is not for her, but for the millions whose fates were bent to serve this grand, static exhibition. She exits history as she entered it, behind a screen. First a silk one, then one of superstition and symbol, and finally one of forensic evidence and historical judgment. We peer through and see the magnificent, terrifying curator standing in a hall of her own design, surrounded by the gorgeous, fragile pieces of a shattered realm. The ultimate illusion was that she could keep the world in a glass case forever. And the final devastating truth was that when she died, she took with her not just a man's life, but the last fraying thread of a system's possibility. All that remained was the brittle porcelain and the coming quake.